you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's good to be here with you all. I have learned a lot. It's been a privilege to listen. I'm going to try to keep this around 20 minutes, 25 minutes, no more than that, so we can get to some dialogue. So as it was said, I am a professor at Rose College, recently graduated from the University of Memphis. I said that because I studied philosophy. Particularly, I'm a social political philosopher. I focus on African American philosophy of the late 19th, early 20th century. And my dissertation work was on Ida B. Wells and her anti-lynching campaign. I won't bore you. If you want to know, you guys me after. I can tell you more about it. But some of that has bled into this presentation. This semester at Rhodes, I have been asked to teach a class on racial violence and justice. And in that class, we started, as I was trying to think about what to share in and around voting. Voting isn't particularly the thing that I focus on, but as I was thinking about how or what to present here this afternoon, I wanted to start us kind of where we started our class, where we look at the historical. And so we started with this notion that I borrowed from James Baldwin, with the idea that history is trapped inside of us and we're trapped in history. And so you can read along with me. So this is from a speech that he gave, The White Man's Guilt. He says, "History, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to be read, and it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. It could scarcely be otherwise, since it is to history that we owe our frames of reference, our identities, and our aspirations." And so, briefly, in the first part of this talk, I just want to kind of share with you a bit of an autobiographical note, a memoir note on my relationship, my developing relationship to voting. And then I want to dig into some of Ida B. Wells and how that informs that. Now, we've been together all afternoon, so I'm about to be vulnerable with you. I'm going to trust you not to judge me as I explain where I've come with voting. Or if you do judge me, just don't tell me about it. So, I was born in 1983. So in 2000, I was too young to vote. I just missed it. And that was the vote between George W. Bush and Al Gore, if I remember right. And there was some fallout from that election that caused some of me and people that I knew a bit of disillusionment, if you remember that time. And there was a bit of frustration. 2004, this is, 9/11 has happened. 2004, I'm now old enough to vote. And I remember standing in the line in Fayetteville, Georgia, where I lived at the time with my best friend. We were in the line for hours, and we did end up voting. But nothing seemed, and I'm stressing that, nothing seemed to come of that political action. And so in 2008, despite, and this is where, again, I ask you not to judge me. In 2008, despite all of the noise and celebration around that particular vote, at the time I just recently got married, and so I remember my aunt-in-law, she had the commemorative plate on the mantle early, and there was a lot of preemptive celebration, and yet, because of my frustrations with the system, I did not vote. I know, see, I asked you. So we in 2008, at the end of 2007, no, into 2000, we moved, my family, my wife, and my two small children, we moved to Wisconsin. And when I say Wisconsin, we were in central Wisconsin, so not Milwaukee, but sort of like in the middle of the state, to give you a grasp of the demographics there. The city we moved into initially was about 10% black, and some of the fallout of the election of Barack Obama, we were congratulated. I was congratulated by random strangers. There was a lot of excitement. And then around 2012, as the vote came, I got a call from my mother, and it came upon the election. We were talking, and somehow I notified her to the fact that I did not vote in 2008. I don't remember how we got there, but I told her, and she, understandably, was very upset. She's my mother. She didn't judge me, but she sort of got into me really good, and she began to walk me down, or to re-alert me to the relationship that black people have had to the vote, and what it has cost so many black people. And she, I don't want to say threatened, but she threatened. She told me to vote. And so I voted in 2012. And from there, through her impetus and other people, I not only voted, but I started to try to get more civically educated and understand the history and the present moment. So in 2016, we were all there. When that vote sort of took a left, it went different than many of us thought. I was sitting in the living room with my wife. We were listening to NPR. We were listening as the map, as they were calling it, and that vote was called. And I could continue to go on, but the thing I want to stress as my relationship is the thing that brought me to an appreciation, a deeper appreciation for voting, was the history, my ancestors, my elders, and their relationship to it. And understanding, and my mother wasn't the only one, but several of them helped me understand what it meant to them. And that was the way that pushed me back into, or out of my sort of, it wasn't apathy, it was disillusionment. And we'll talk about that in a second, toward the end. But I want to make a quick caveat before we deal with some things, because I want to make sort of an appeal as it relates to this. But I want to talk about Ida B. Wells really fast. So this is from a speech she gave in 1910. It was called How Enfranchisement Stops Lynching. 1910, just to give you a context of the moment, we're about 18 years, a little under 2 decades into Ida B. Wells' investigation into the practice and motivations of lynching. And in this article, she's reflecting on, it's one of the Carolinas, South Carolina, and one of the state senators, Tillman, who is explaining how they have been going about undoing the black vote. This is the context of what she's writing. So in South Carolina, that's going on, but also in Illinois, there were some laws recently passed that held the feet of the elected officials, the sheriffs, and various people at least on paper, it attempted to hold their feet to the fire in their treatment of incarcerated individuals who the lynch mob came looking for. There was a pattern of effort not being made to protect them. And so there was a law that was passed in Illinois that hoped to drive them to do more to protect them. And so Ida B. Wells is reflecting on these things as she writes this. And so this is what she says. It's on the screen. So she says, with no sacredness of the ballot, there can be no sacredness of human life itself. For if the strong can take the weak man's ballot when it suits his purpose to do so, he will take his life also. Having successfully swept aside the constitutional safeguards to the ballot, it is the smallest of small matters for the South to sweep aside its own safeguards to human life. And so what's interesting here about the point that Ida B. Wells is making is that she's intertwined, or she's calling us to pay attention to how closely related the political and the personal are. And she's saying that if you remove the political safeguards, which is what was happening at the time, then the safeguards of the preservation of life, to human life, are removed as well. She goes on to say, the more complete the disfranchisement, the more frequent and horrible have been the hangings, shootings, and burnings. Now, she says, let the Afro-American depend on no party, but on himself for his salvation. Let him continue to get education, character, and above all, put money in his purse. So now I was asked to talk about the importance of voting, but one of the things Ida B. Wells pushes me to take serious is that voting isn't in and of itself enough. Okay? And so she is rehashing this thing that she had been grappling with before 1892 when her investigation began, and it's what she deems are called the doctrine of self-help. Now, she says that this doctrine must be practiced, and what this doctrine was made up of was thrift, economy, education, and character. Now, this is her writing in the late 1880s. And she, as she was thinking through this doctrine of self-help, she believed that if black people, particularly in the South, took serious thrift and economy and education and character, and we can all think about the discussion we just had at the end of the last presentation, that it would bring about a development among black people, and that it depended on them to guide or to dictate their future, where it was going to go. She says that this was the main theme of her writing when she first started to write in the 1880s, and it was driven by this question of, will we ever learn self-respect? So she was very adamant about black people learning their value, their worth, and if they then instituted certain practices in light of that worth, then they could dictate their future. However, in 1892, she had to wrestle with the reality of this one-to-one when a lynching in Memphis took place, an infamous lynching of Moss, McDowell, and Stewart, who were co-owners among a co-op that started the People's Grocery. Really quick, there was a group of black individuals who decided to start a grocery store right there in Memphis. Well, it wasn't Memphis at the time, it is Memphis now. And they built this store on what was called the Curve, much to the chagrin of a white store owner named William Barrett. William Barrett had decided he didn't want economical competition, and so he vowed to destroy the store. Through different machinations, he created the opportunity to raid the store with some plainclothes police deputies. They kicked in the back door. Gunfire was exchanged because the owners of the store were told they could defend themselves. Once they were alerted to the fact that these were plainclothes deputies that they were shooting at, they stopped. A few of them were injured, taken to the hospital, and the newspapers started to threaten the owners of the store and the greater community that if any of these police officers were to die, then there would be sure punishment. The three individuals I named were arrested and they were held in jail, and there was a group of black people who decided to sit outside the jail to protect them because no protection was coming from the city. Once it was clear that there would be recovery by those police officers, they went home because they thought, all right, the threat is neutralized. However, late one night, a mob comes, takes those three, they take them about a mile from the city, and they lynch them. And Ida B. Wells says that this lynching was for her a rude awakening that alerted her to all of the elements that were going on in lynching, and she had to grapple with her doctrine of self-help. She doesn't abandon it, but it's contextualized, and she understands that along with self-help, there needed to be civic and political education and engagement, right? And so this is what she's reflecting on in this article. And what she noticed was that black people, for instance, were advised, and I just told you about the People's Grocery, to start their own businesses, to let the ballot alone, and to start their own businesses and acquire property. And what she realized is that once that happened, there were laws put into place to discriminate and to undo the economic advance. Black people were also told to just educate your children. And if you just educated them and that they developed character, then they would be okay. And then what she noticed is that laws were placed to segregate schools and to undo the educational advances. And so she recognized in this pattern that it was the doctrine of self-help needed to be supplemented with engaged and meaningful political action, right? Really quickly, that's 14. Okay, we're okay. I want to take you back to her investigation of lynching that she did that she lays out in 1895 in the Red Record. In the Red Record, she notices that there was a series or phases of justifications for lynching. And there is a rhythm to it. So she said that there would be an uptick in lynchings, and then there would be an excuse. Once attention was drawn to that uptick, an excuse would be offered. And then once the excuse was offered, for a while, the outrage was abated. And then once it was seen that that excuse had no merit, a new excuse was needed. Do you see the rhythm? Mm-hmm. Right? Okay, so the first excuse that was offered, this is coming right out of emancipation and the liberation of the enslaved, and she says that there was a rumor that there were these insurrections or these race riots that were going to take place. And so as a mode of preemptive self-defense, they needed to kill the alleged leaders of these insurrections. But she noticed that they never really surfaced or manifested, even though this self-defense was exercised against them. And so a new excuse was needed, and that was no Negro domination. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to skip it for a second because it's more relevant to what we're doing. And then the third excuse was this idea of the necessity of avenging the alleged increase of the sexual assault of white women by black men. She says that excuse, the third, was the most effective. But for our purposes today, I want to focus on the second phase of excuses. So this call for no Negro domination was an idea that once, this is around Reconstruction, once black people started their own businesses, run for political offices, register to vote, there was a decision made by many white individuals in the South that they were not going to be politically dominated by black people. And so she says this in Red Record. She says, the Southern white man would not consider that the Negro had any right which a white man was bound to respect. And the idea of a Republican form of government in the Southern states grew into general contempt. It was maintained that this is a white man's government, and regardless of numbers, the white man should rule. So, in response to the ballot, and what she calls the ballot the invaluable emblem of citizenship, we see a violent reprisal to sort of get rid of the vote. And that it first came through forms of the Ku Klux Klan and the regulators and lawless mobs, but once they were able to successfully tamp it down with violence, we see it move into the legislature, the legislative halls and the like. And she says that they were so successful in destroying the black vote that there was this call of no Negro domination was no longer needed, and that's when we moved into the third phase. But I highlight that this second phase because this also I'm as a philosopher tends to do, I'm complicating everything. Okay, so it's not just the vote, but it's not the vote. Do you understand what I'm saying? But what she understood is that there was this push against, while the doctrine of self-help needed political engagement to supplement it, it would not be without a response. So anyway, to bring it to a close, because I said we're almost at the 20-minute mark, she never gives up on the doctrine of self-help, but it's contextualized, and in our own life, we see someone who combines all of the elements, right? So she wrote in the press, tried to educate her people, but she also organized in her community. She started many black women club organizations in Chicago. She started the Negro Fellowship League, which unfolded out of her Sunday school class that she taught. She also she participated in informed civic engagement, and she also ran for state senate toward the end of her life. So in it, we see all of it, like we see her engaging in all of the elements. And so here, as I close, I just want to close with the idea that this pattern, she was suspicious of this pattern that was developing in America, and that I want to argue, I'm just going to preface on the front end, I don't think it's over. So in this article on enfranchisement, on the vote, she notices that, she says that from the year 1894, lynching decreased for the next decade. So she said that as her and others started to alert America to the pattern of lynching, the amount of lynchings began to decrease. However, and she says the reason they decreased is because the conscience of the nation was stirred. But with time, it was lulled back to sleep. And once it was lulled back to sleep, she said over those past 10 years, from 1900 to when she wrote this article, we saw increase in lynchings and race riots, what was called race riots at the time. I think we now call them race massacres because they were more one-sided than riots. But she saw an increase. So now, this is what she was suspicious of. She says this is written in her autobiography that she started in around 1930. She never got a chance to finish it. She passed before it was done. But in this autobiography, so she's writing this much later, she says, the more I studied the situation, the more I was convinced that the Southerner had never gotten over his resentment that the Negro was no longer his plaything, his servant, and his source of income. In the final chapter of Crusade for Justice, she begins by saying that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And then she goes and she warns the reader not to get lulled into sleep into the institutions that black people had formed that were doing work at the time. So she's warning the reader not to be lulled to sleep in the way that the American conscience was. And that warning, I think, is what I hope to leave us with, that sort of tension. Because if you were listening carefully, there are many echoes in what we hear in Ida B. Wells in our current moment. Yes. There is one of the things that really stirred me to take voting serious was the efforts to which they tried to take the vote from us. Right? We see those practices right now. I have a friend who found out that he was taken off the books in Georgia, the voting registry. He's a legally registered voter, but they're doing these purgings in certain southern states, and it's being removed quietly. So if there are certain entities that take the vote that serious, then the vote is something that we ought to take serious as well. I submit. However, I also submit with Ida B. Wells that it's not just the vote that she was compelling us to take serious, but that in between period, where we need to become more civically educated. There's a lot that we don't know. When I say the we, maybe I'm not preaching to the choir here, but my age group, there's a lot that we don't know about the mechanics of different positions. We need to become more civically educated, more civically intellectual, more civically sophisticated, and add to that vote organizing and a determined effort not to let these things be taken away. But we should also understand that just like in Ida B. Wells' day, there's a reprisal. We can expect it. We've seen it. We're in the wake of it, etc. But I want one last caveat. I'm a little bit over time, but I want to make this appeal for my age and younger. I'm sympathetic to their apathy when it comes to the political machinery. And I think part of the civic engagement needs to be a sensitivity to that apathy, because it's not misplaced and it's not short-sighted. There are times where it does seem, often what is being offered to us is the idea of the lesser of two evils. I'm sure you've heard that, or those things. And the generation coming behind me is kind of tired of that. They're longing for the day when there's more than just two evils, if that makes sense. And so that's part of the education. But I digress. We all need to hear each other is what I'm saying. The vote definitely matters, but the fatigue is understandable. But I want to close with Baldwin, where we started. So this is Baldwin talking through this idea of history being trapped in us and us being trapped in history. And he says, as one realizes the history that is trapped in them and they understand it, this is when the possibility arises that they can be released from it. Prior to that moment, he says the history really drives us and it moves us around. But it's when we recognize that we are trapped in history and history is trapped in us that we can do something about it. And so he says, and it is with great pain and terror that one begins to realize this, that they're trapped. In great pain and terror, one begins to assess the history which has placed one where one is and formed one's point of view. In great pain and terror because thereafter one enters into battle with that historical creation, oneself, and attempts to recreate oneself according to a principle more humane and more liberating. One begins the attempt to achieve a level of personal maturity and freedom which robs history of its tyrannical power and also changes history. So we want to change history, but in order for that, we must acknowledge the history that is trapped in us. We must not run from it. We all have different histories but we're all a part of this long trajectory, and we're trapped until we collectively acknowledge it. And it's through that acknowledgement that we can bring about change. That change is not an individual, like we need to surrender that individualism, the vote, all of this stuff where we're just thinking about our outcomes. We're fortunate that people like Ida B. Wells have the community in mind. We need to re-engage, reimagine what it means to be working on behalf of the community, and hopefully together we can sooner than later, become free from this history. Thank you.
And now for the moderation.
Well, first of all, thank you for that powerful talk. There's so much. And I'm going to ask a few questions and then we'll open up. I'll start with, I'm a clubs woman, so I'm going to start with this, this Ida B. Wells thread, right? In particular, you speak to how we see Ida B. Wells right now over the course of her life really hold the tension of the vote and the and, right? The vote and we see that with the resourcing of community, extra governmental agencies, right? And so I'd be interested in what do you think that looks like in the present day?
No, it's good. I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I think it starts, even today, some things have come up. I think one of the things clubs can do is re-education. Re-immersing them in this longer trajectory. Because one of the things that is compelling to me about Ida B. Wells and James Baldwin, or these different individuals, is how literary they were, right? So in her autobiography, Ida B. Wells talks about, on Sundays, because she wasn't allowed to do anything else, her parents were very staunch Christians, she just had to read the Bible. And she read the Bible like through and through. But then she also went to a library and she talks about how she read Shakespeare. She was just read. And she would be, when she first hit Memphis, she was a part of these lyceums, and so she practiced in public speaking and debate and stage plays and different. And so I think it's like that combination of art and a reintroduction to history is necessary. Because one of the things, I have the luxury of teaching like 18-year-olds, and I love their zeal. I actually have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and I love their zeal, but their zeal is often ahistorical. So it's a lot of running with no sense of direction where to run or where steps have already been run. And so that is, for me personally, that's one of the things that I think we should start. Now we're up against, and I'm gonna sound old if I keep going down this train, but like we're up against a force, a trajectory that's like undermining the willingness to become like, to read and to think. But I personally think that, especially with that generation, they have to know where they've come from in order to know where they're going, and where to dot, because to keep recreating the wheel is sort of a waste in time. So like there are things that we need to learn before we can go, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. And then my second thing is you guided this, right? We are in a really important electoral moment. We find ourselves here. It's almost October. And we still see Ivy Wells Barnett in particular speaking to this idea of relying on ourselves, particularly as Black people, for salvation, right? And I'm interested in your thoughts of like, what does that look like in a moment where the white man's rule doesn't always come from the white man, right? It can come via a variety. We're seeing this now as we start to openly critique the Obama administration for the ways in which Black lives were not served, right? But that took years, you know. I remember when Jeremiah Wright, as a scholar of religion, when Jeremiah Wright couldn't, I mean, he's in now, he's talking Black liberation theology, but there was a time in which what he was saying was very unpopular. And so what does it mean to be in an electoral moment that seems sometimes to be ahistorical in and of itself?
That's a great question. Oh man, all right. When you meet people, you debate on how like vulnerable, like open. I'm just gonna go for it. All right, so this is where I'll tell you this, like when I'm at my most cynical with the answer, and then I'll try to move toward hope. I don't want to end in cynicism. Okay, so there was I don't want to politicized, but like when I hear the way truth is treated today, it scares me. So what I mean by that is listening to, and I have to evoke his name because he said it. So when I listen to J.D. Vance get pressed about the Haitian immigrant thing, and when it struck me when he said, "Oh yeah, it could prove to be false, but it did what I needed it to do." You're talking, right? Like, so like that kind of attitude toward the truth, it is unclear to me how to engage that meaningfully. If you're on the internet, if you're in the comment section, I think one of the genius things of trolling is that trolls aren't after the truth. They're after like engagement. So they want you to like jump at them, right? However, to ignore a lie doesn't help either. So we're stuck in this moment, and I'm now looking to you, maybe you can help me. We're stuck in this moment where it doesn't behoove us to ignore it, but it doesn't behoove us to engage it on the level, because that's not what they're after, right? So what that has to do with your question, I hope as I push toward your question, is like this, that Black people need to help themselves. Often when the necessity to help themselves is evoked, it's treated disingenuously. Like, why it's 2024 and these things that America believes itself to have done for Black people are listed. And so like there's no need for Black self-help anymore. Because like you have what you've been asking for. You have a president, right? Obama, like you, etc. Now a second one's running. Like, what are you complaining for? So like that, so I wonder what it would mean to have this conversation only among friends sometimes. Again, I'm still in the cynical version, like not to have the conversation as openly. I wonder what Ida B. Wells would say, like how much she would write to the issue, or would she have skewed more club work, more, right? Because it just seems like the conversation is so noisy around the necessity that it gets in the way of us actually doing the thing. So maybe if we did it, we could talk about it later. And so that I think we should just, we heard today about the school to prison pipeline. We heard about health disparities. These are all things that we could just engage in, maybe more quietly, and just do them. And then down the line, we could talk about why we did them. Because my hope is that we can find the space to do them. I just think there are actors who are acting in bad faith who make the movement forward difficult because they're causing a noise that's hard to penetrate. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I mean, I think what you are speaking to, right, is I think that in my own work, I argue that the notion of Black people having private lives in and of itself is like, I complicate that, right? I think that part of being in a Black body in this nation state necessitates that even my deeply personal is political in order for me to maintain life and living. And so some of what I think, especially in this electoral cycle, we're seeing some of that. We're seeing rightfully disenfranchised voters saying, especially my generation, right, that is not necessarily even saying we are not going to vote, but is raising very valid concerns that impact us, that are saying we're probably going to go vote. And also, we need y'all to know we cannot blindly follow any one candidate or any party, anywhere. And kind of making sure we're staying on a pivot and that we're holding whoever is in office accountable for the advancement of Black lives and all people.
No, that's great. That's a great point. And in that article that I cited a few times, one of the things that she says, and at the time, because she's talking about Black people's relationship to the Republican Party, I'm trying to go into history to flip it on it, whatever. But what she was saying is for Black people never to become beholden to. She said, "Don't claim a party."
Right.
Now, you do with that what you want, but I think there is some wisdom to always staying agile enough to hold accountable. Because it's once I shared her suspicion of this desire. I think we do see this historical desire to bring Black people back to a place where they're playthings for this nation. That's just the ebb and flow of the country. And so in order, I think one of the ways to keep that at bay is to never be beholden to any one group, because often those groups use that to their advantage, right? Because then everybody else is the boogeyman, but you can trust me even though I have not showed you that. And I get that I'm saying this at a particular time in American history, so don't read into what I'm saying. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying, as Black people, we might want to slow our allegiances down until there's evidence for that, like full allegiance to be given. Yeah.
All right, what questions do you all have?
What do you think about the current efforts that are being made at some of the school boards? It seems that there's an attack on school boards where they're talking about the importance of being well read. They're taking over and controlling what you can read. They're controlling what history can be taught. In some way, they're propagandizing truth. What do you think we should do about that, or what the impacts of that will be?
Yeah, so like what do I make of it? I think the CRT conversation, right, is what you're getting at, right? Moms for Liberty. And until last year I was an English teacher. But I had the privilege of working in a district that once the state said you cannot teach CRT, which no high school teacher, no teacher anywhere in K-12 for the record is teaching critical race theory. Unless they're teaching a class on Kim Crenshaw in K-12, which I haven't heard of one, please let me know if there is one. So some of it is ignorance, but all this stuff is, all of it is ignorant, but we have to be, and this is where we have to, sometimes we think about understanding the historical implications and we think far back, but really, the 1619 Project came out, right? And it came out kind of in the moment before we saw the resurgence of the critical race rhetoric. 1619 Project comes out, they're mad, right? I mean, Twitter's mad, everybody is upset because this is an alternative narrative rooted in history, right? So it's another voice. And so after you see the 1619 project, slowly but surely, especially in the South, you start to see school boards say you cannot teach critical race theory. Critical race theory then turns to African American history, right? And it just goes on and on and on. But that is connected, right, to schools and like how the funding of public schools. It's all a very, very intentional, sometimes political, but a lot of times not even solely a political thing happening around ideology, what is truth, and how we want to, in particular, what it means to, what the notion of public schools is, and what it means to have our student scholars engaging in discourse, right? Now, as an educator, my response to critical race theory is that the purpose of education for me as an educator in my English language arts class is to cause my students to think critically. And I fail them as an educator if I put forth any one lens without requiring to tell a more complete story. I never needed, and nor did the majority of my colleagues, we never needed to indoctrinate a child into anything. But what my responsibility was to put the most amount of resources in front of them and to challenge them to think with and beyond what I presented to them. When we start to take discourse out of the classroom, we defeat the purpose of education. And we undermine both professionals who are educators who are trained to put materials in front of their students, and we undermine the capacity of the next generation to think critically. Like, we set them up for failure when we say that they can, and we set ourselves up because these are ultimately the people that will lead. So that was in a roundabout way to answer that. That's my opinion.
I would just add, from what I understand, the attack on critical race theory was a rhetorical one. The individual who started it, he picked critical race theory because the words critical and race were inside of it. And he assumed that the constituency he was appealing to would only need that, the words critical and race, and it would be enough. So that tells us the fight is not genuine. It's not about it's not about what it claims to be about. As I was thinking about your question, I thought about in the preface of Ida B. Wells' autobiography, she tells us why she was writing it. And she was writing it because she was afraid that Reconstruction would be forgotten. And so as someone who lived through Reconstruction, she wanted to give this autobiographical story to help young people understand. Because she says what drove her is that there was a young person that was coming from a YWCA event, and they didn't know who Ida B. Wells was. And so the young lady did, but the rest of them didn't. So she was like, what do I tell them? And so that pushed Ida B. Wells to write the book. This is the point of what I'm trying to say. I think if we, the school board is the school board, but that doesn't stop us from being able to educate children. We can find mechanisms and avenues to still give kids what they need. And it may be through these means, through the biographical. Do you know who Ida B. Wells is? Do you know who Frederick Douglass is? Do you know who Mary Church Terrell is? Do you know who Fannie Lou Hamer is, right? As the kids know these stories, and we do the work of contextualizing them, then I don't mean this, but they can have critical race theory, right? Because if you read Fannie Lou Hamer, the thing about the critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw, she's drawing on Anna Julia Cooper, she's drawing on people who were writing in 1890, so a lot of these names we're not familiar with. And I think if we started to get familiar with these names and these individuals and where they were coming from, then we would see that these ideas go way back, and that any one attack isn't enough to undo how we teach these things. Now, I don't know what to do for the children of those parents who are fighting, but maybe you do. But I know that the children we have access to, we can still educate them despite what these moms of liberty and all them have to say. Yeah.
And the only thing I'd add is this, and I say this a lot, if a book gets banned, you should buy a copy of it for every child in your life.
Right.
Like if you want something to do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Because I used to tell my high school students, if they're banning it, you need to get it.
That's right.
And you need to have multiple copies of it. Because there's a reason, look at Fahrenheit, from a more Fahrenheit 451, like just,
Yeah.
the movie
Oh, yeah.
version of it.
Right.
With Michael B. Jordan, but like they're burning books, right? So anything that they don't want you to read, you should turn your eyes toward. Other questions?
Well, you,
John. Oh,
Yeah, well,
somebody
there.
back there?
okay. You have answered part of my question, so I thank you for that. Because I was thinking that, I said to my friend, I'll be well, was really ahead of her time. But I don't think that now. I think she was giving us a roadmap, something that we should hang on to, learn from, because I often think, have we moved the needle at all since her time? And I think maybe the answer is forthcoming, because it is something that we should look forward to. So thank you for answering some of the questions, and I think that we just need to continue to educate ourselves like she has suggested, and maybe we can move the needle ourselves, because it seems like we're going in a vicious circle.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's important to see, at least right now in America, I think it's important to see time like that. Not as this straight line, but there were problems that initiated with the inception of this country that we've never shaken loose. That's why someone like Ida B. Wells can sound so prescient, because she was dealing with issues that we were dealing with. Something I forgot to, even with the education question, these organizations who stand up to like stop educating, I only see this as like an extension of this will be a white man's government. Like they have to wipe the education part in order to be able to continue, and we are trapped in a loop. The key is to not, and I'm kind of preaching to myself, the key is to not despair when you find yourself in another a revolution of that circle, but instead to hear that as a call, as she said, that it's eternal vigilance that's the cost of liberty. And that eternal there, I think she's not using haphazardly. There's never a moment, she's telling us, there's never a moment where we can safely be lulled to sleep. Because that is what the individuals who are taking us through these loops want, so that they can extend them. So I agree with you. I just think sometimes when we see time as a straight line, then we're just like, man, Ida B. Wells is all the way back there, but I don't know. Ida B. Wells is kind of right next to me. Like we're still together because we're doing this until America decides otherwise. And we can't give up before they decide otherwise. Yeah.
So this is just thinking. How is this related, you talk about education, how is this related to the prison pipeline, kids probably that are really getting involved in the criminal justice system, the idea that minorities, people African American, are violent individuals, that's why they commit crimes, and linked to people not having the right to vote because they have a criminal history. Is that all linked together, do you think, with the same things that Ida B. Wells was discussing?
I'll let the doctor answer the Ida B. Wells part. But I'll answer very shortly and say it's all anti-black. Like, the short is that it's all anti-black, right? The cradle of the prison pipeline is deeply rooted in anti-blackness. Not wanting to teach black history in schools is rooted in anti-blackness. The fact that black girls in preschool are 3 times more likely to be suspended, right, is deeply rooted in anti-blackness. And it's all, these things are all talking to each other because they all are up from the same particular brand of white hegemonic colonial imperialism. That is anti-blackness.
That's great. That's a great answer. And you're right, boy, you this one, I'm not scared anymore. No, because the thing that's interesting, so a lot of times we associate lynching with Ida B. Wells. But Ida B. Wells was interested in racialized violence as a whole, right? And you can read, I think, a faithful story of racialized violence that goes from enslavement to the lynching era, to convict leasing, to mass incarceration. Like, it's a pretty straight line. And what all of those practices are trying to do is, and this is what's so startling about her plaything quote, is just that. To just keep black people in a certain position as it relates to power and the nation state and all those and all these other things. Something you said in your presentation that just startled me, and I think I knew it, but I was really appreciative of your presentation. The correlation between recidivism and reading, like literacy rates, like because you think like it's wild to think that if you could just not teach a black child to read by the third grade, you more or less lock their life in to a grand degree. And so we see that game being played, and the education question is drawn all into this, and I agree. I think it's just it's a part of a longer pattern. Lynching, when we hone in on the brutal nature of lynching, and we can sometimes sensationalize our minds out of understanding how connected it is to the larger story. And I don't see what the work you do as disconnected in any meaningful way from the lynching tree. It's all attempts to keep little black boys and girls locked in with the hope that it can lock in their future, right? And so I hope we can do a better job when we collectively have these conversations of seeing the connective tissue from enslavement to now, because the racialized violence, while it may take different forms, and some forms go away for a while and then resurface, they all have the same motivation and the same mechanism, and that's to keep black people in a very particular position in this nation. Yeah.
May I ask my question now, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think you're on. Do you think it is important for us to educate our young black children about the importance of voting long before they turn 18 years old, and just go through the stages with them? And if you think so, what age should we start? Thank you.
That's a great question. I wouldn't limit their education to just voting. I think you can start, secondary? Like, you can start as early as like elementary school, just helping them understand their place in the larger scheme of things, what power is available to them. But I also don't think it should just be like the political machinery, but they should know what clubs are. They should know what community organizing is, right? Like, I think about groups who tried to feed children on the way to school, like those sort of things that because I think they should be shown the power in that self-help, but not absent the political as well. Because I think the earlier you can teach a child that they're a community member, the better. They need to know they're not just an atom, but they're in a network, and that network has a legacy, and it can start early on. They can start organizing, because children see issues in communities, and if they get taught that there's power in that observation, and then they learn the means to which they can organize themselves and do little things like pantries, and like that is powerful because you're teaching them that the power lies in their hands, while also helping them understand that there's a greater picture. And there are some limitations. I do not want, some of the things we try to do across time have been burned down, they've been bombed. So that also, they need to be informed of that when they can understand that they will meet adversity, that it's not, we don't give them like a Disney-fied or Hollywood version of these stories. Ida B. Wells got run out of Memphis and could never come back. She was faithful, right, to her charge, but it almost cost her life. And she dies at an early age. Now that we're learning about the trauma that's held in the body, I'm sure that affected her. But so they need to know about that part too. But I think what holds all this together is that as early as they can conceptualize community, they need to understand they're a community member and what that could mean for the way they approach life. Does that get at your question? Okay.
One more?
All right.
Love the one more.
Let me say one thing. She talks about changing history, and that reminds me of Marxism, who hated history and wanted to rewrite history. And what we've done today, I think, is go through history that we need to remember. But I think we need to be real careful that we don't become obsessed with history and become grievance industry. We, like Kamala Harris said, we need to close the book sometime and look forward. And I think America has a great opportunity to look forward to so many black people that have given us. And I appreciate what you've done today, and I think it's very, very helpful and very enlightening.
Yeah, I think in a nation that still has not accounted for, I think you can, I don't know, I hope we'll be able to close. So there's some books I hope will close, right? But it's hard to close a book when only the victor has written, right? And when the implications of the chapters disenfranchise certain people and privilege others, right? And it's dangerous to try to close a book before time. And that doesn't, and it is possible, right? I believe we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So it is, as my mom would say. And so it is possible, I think we are always being challenged to live in the and. There are absolutely implications of enslavement that are real. And if I ignore those, I cannot teach black children. I cannot be black in this nation. And this particular nation has not accounted for what is in the book. And needs to. Because it takes on a new name. The last thing I'll say is when I first started doing public memory work in Nashville, I am not a historian by trade. And the conversation was, I met with a group of black historians at the very beginning of it who were like, we want to talk about the history, the facts of the history, but we don't want to talk about the black man that was shot dead a block or two from where they lynched a man decades ago. And I was the person who came in the room and said, actually, I don't think this is ironic, right? I had a group of youth interns who actually at one point we do, it's not live on our website right now, we have a map that overlays decade by decade the forms of violence that have occurred in national proper. And a lot of where you see a man lynched, like 4 blocks from the same where a man was abducted you see a man lynched by the Metro National Police Department within blocks from where a man was abducted to be lynched post-Reconstruction. And if I come into the room and say I don't want to talk about the book, well, we're in the same book, we're just in a different chapter. So I think that there is a way to do that and to also imagine a more just and whole future. But I don't think that being, I have grown tired of being asked solely to imagine a new future and a better world without talking about the reality of a past world. I'll also say that this last thing I'll say, because we talked about Baldwin. I think Baldwin is somebody who holds this very, very well, right, throughout his life, because he critiques America like nobody's business, and he says, I critique it because I love this country, right? When we look at My Dungeon Shook, we go deep into the canon of Baldwin, right? We also realize that even though he was deep out of and from and of Harlem, that man spent more time out of this nation than he did in it. And I live that to say that, especially in a black body, there's this, what the boy would call double consciousness, right? This notion of understanding we are always in the end, Christine Sharp would call this in the wake, right? And until we account collectively for that, there is no closing. I know it was a little lengthy, but.
No, please, no. So if you just indulge, this is the last answer, and then you can go home. It's okay. Just 1 second. So it's interesting. It is interesting when the calls to move forward come sometimes in a nation that is often obsessed with its past in a certain way. And what I mean by that is America prides itself on being a nation rooted in a certain history. It draws much of its philosophy from this mythological past of independence and self-will, etc. Is that the history I'm being asked to move on from? Because I don't think so. So there's a particular history that we are often being asked to move on from. And that is where it gets pernicious for me. Like if we can remember 1776, but not 1620, what? Why? Or if we can remember 1776, but not 1861, 3, 5, you understand what I'm saying? So like this idea, and the point I'm really getting at, is that you cannot move on from an unacknowledged past. That's like, that very ask is kind of like nonsensical. It's not till I know where I've come from that I can even move forward. What's forward if I don't know what's behind me? Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a danger of moving forward without acknowledging the past and walking right back into where you came from if you do not acknowledge it. And so I think part of this task of moving forward is acknowledging the past. That's what Baldwin is getting at, right? It's not until the history is acknowledged that we can begin to change it. And there is a need to change it, or because we hear and see and feel these repetitions in our body. Trayvon reminds us of Emmett Till. Emmett Till reminds us, right? But you get robbed of the importance of that remembrance if you try to move on too fast. The interesting thing is that, even when we hear other mantras, that again is on purpose. What is that group trying to forget? Nothing. They're trying to go back to that mythological past. So to ask one group to forget about the past because of the unease or the dis-ease that it causes is not, to me it sort of gives the game away. Like you don't want a future. You want the past. It's interesting that Ida B. Wells, Baldwin, we want a future, but we cannot have that future until we acknowledge and deal with meaningfully the past. And so if we want to move forward, we have to deal with the historical because we're haunted by it. And in order to exorcise those demons, we have to look right at it and deal with it.
Amen.